works, as I told you, it indicates the complete lifespan of a component. From component creation to component end, what are the phases? In that, what is the first phase? So the first phase is NG on changes. NG on changes is the first phase. After the component is created, the first phase is NG on changes. So what are the activities performed here? First, memory is initialized, memory is configured, the memory is initialized with the value, property binding, attribute binding, style binding, class binding, event binding, data binding. All these activities happen in which phase? NG on changes, both one-way binding and two-way. Everything happens on NG on changes. So that is the first phase we discussed yesterday, right? Now, in the next one, second phase, we have NG on init. Yesterday, we already learned NG on changes. The second phase after NG on changes, the next phase is NG on init. That is the second phase. We have NG on init. That is another phase. So what happens on NG on init? What are the activities performed in this phase? Let's see. So NG on changes, it is initializing values, storing values, and it is handling data binding, event binding. NG on init, second phase is, so it allocates memory for current component, so which is known as context memory. It allocates memory for current component, which is known as context memory. It allocates the memory for component that is called context memory. What is the purpose of this context memory? Means you can store values in context memory. We can store values into context memory, so which are accessible to other components that run within the context of a component. That is what actually NG on init. It allocates memory for current component. That means it is initializing memory. It initializes memory for current component. That memory is called as context memory. What is advantage of that is you can store value in that memory so that those values can be used by other components which are running in that context. That means you have seen parent component can send data into child component. Do we need any extra activity for this? We don't need any extra activity for this. Just child component needs a property which can accept the data. Parent component doesn't need anything extra to do. It have to just assign the value into child property. Whatever value is stored in parent component, it can be directly sent into child. Only the point is there must be a child component with a property that can accept data from parent. So parent component doesn't need any extra effort for sending data into child. It can directly send data into child. So that is what actually it can do. And that means generally context memory is the memory allocated for a component and made available to the other components that are running in that context. For example, this is a simple approach actually. Suppose, so we have a parent component, and for this parent component, whatever the memory is allocated, this memory is called context memory. So this context memory, you can make it available to the child component also. That means any component which is running inside it. So this is a child component, and the child component can access and use this parent. That means the child component can access and use this parent. That means the child component can use that memory here. So the memory allocated for a component and which is available to other components which are running within, not explicit. For example, suppose you are navigating from this component to another component. That means you are navigating to another component. This is another component. So this is actually, it is explicit component. Now context memory, this memory is not available. That means you are moving from one component to another. Is context memory available for the next component? No. Context memory is available only for the component that runs within the current component. If any component is running within the current component, then only context memory is available. If the component is finished, you go to next component, then the memory allocated for this component is destroyed. That is not available to another. So context is a memory which is available in every web technology. Java, .NET, PHP, Python, everywhere you have to work with context memory. That means the memory allocated for a page is used by another page which runs within that page. That is actually context memory. So here, who allocates context memory? Who provides access to that context memory? That is all under the control of ng-on-init. So initializing the memory, making that memory available for storing data and available to other components that run in the context, that is done by this ng-on-init. So that is the work of ng-on-init. ng-on changes and ng-on-init. Next important, we have ng-do-check. We have ng-do-check. We have another ng-do-check. So after changes init, after init do check. ng do check is nothing but actually what happens in ng do check is generally whatever data of parent, it will come to child, but child data cannot go to parent. That means the data of child component is not accessible to parent. That means the context memory of child is not accessible to its parent. That means the context of parent is accessible to child, but the context of child is not accessible to parent. Then what we have done? How we transported the data from child to parent? Yeah, by using what? Output. By using output and by using event emitter. By using custom event, right? That means, so ng do check. That means it is the method. It is the method that is executed to transport data explicitly from child component to parent. That means if any action cannot handle implicit, then it is defined explicitly by using ng do check. That is what actually the purpose of do check. That means what activities are performed here? What are the activities performed in this phase? What activities are performed? Custom events. Custom events are created. Custom events are created. Events are created by using two things. One is output, another one event emitter. They are created, and event arguments are emitted from child to parent. These all activities are done in do check. So if anybody asked you in interviews in which phase built-in events will work, in which phase built-in events will work? Built-in events means on click, on change, on blur, on focus. In which phase they work? In which phase the built-in events will work? ng on changes. Built-in events works in first phase, na? Right? In ng on changes. When custom events will work? ng do check. ng do check. So the default events will fire up on ng on changes. The custom events will fire up on ng do check. So if any data is not transported implicitly, we need to transport it explicitly. So externally, we need to use some force for sending the data. For that, we learned how to create custom events, how to transport data using custom event. This happens in do check. That is the next phase. Now the fourth phase is ng after content init. ng after content init. ng after content init. This is the next phase. So what happens in after content init? Actually, what happens in after content init is nothing but I hope you learned about DOM concept. I explained the DOM concept. I explained in before TypeScript started. You learned DOM concept, document object model. You learned the parsing model. That means you know how HTML presents the content. I told you that flow. Generally in HTML you will learn means how browser works. No. So I will just give you an overview. The overview is suppose yes, actually generally what happens in HTML, you might have learned that because when you start learning your HTML, you should know how the process works actually. Generally, what happens, we have a browser, and every browser is under the control of browser engines. Every browser have a engine. Can you name some browser engines? We have browser engines. We have a engine V8. We have an engine called Spider Monkey. So we have a engine called Chakra. We have an engine called so what is that engine? WebKit is an engine. These are different types of engines. Every browser is under the control of these engines. Just like I told you in the last session, view engine, rendering engine. Actually, every browser is under the control of these engines. We have browser engines. Different browsers have different engines. Different browser have different engines. So this is browser engines actually. So for example, so these are different types of browser engines. Yeah. So these are different browser engines. Different browser have different engines. Chrome browser engines are Blink and V8. Internet Explorer have Trident and Chakra. Firefox have Gecko and Spider Monkey. Edge have Edge HTML Chakra. Recently, Edge is using Chromium. Chromium is the latest engine it is using. Opera also uses Blink and V8. Safari uses WebKit and Nitro. These are all browser engines. Complete JavaScript HTML is under the control of these engines only. Is JavaScript working or not, HTML working or not, everything is under the control of these engines. So every browser have an engine. Actually, how it works is, generally how they work is, usually what happens, you write some markup, some bold, you written hello. Like this, you write some markup. What happens when you write the markup? This markup is actually converted into, the markup is converted into bytes. It is converted into bytes. That means binary form. First, the markup is converted into bytes. These bytes are converted into characters. These bytes are converted into characters like this, angle bracket B, angle bracket close, like this. The bytes are converted into characters. That means we have the word H, E, L, so L, O, like this. So these characters, whatever characters are present, these characters are combined. These characters are combined into tokens. These characters are combined into tokens. We call tokens. Bytes are converted into what? Characters. Characters are converted into tokens. That means characters are combined. Characters are combined and they are prepared like this. This is a token. They are prepared like this. This is a token. Generally, you people call these tokens as tags. But remember, there is no concept of tag. Browser don't know anything like tag. Browser knows only tokens. You use that word tag, but nowhere in browser there will be a option called tag. There will be no tags at all, only tokens. There are technically called as tokens. These tokens are actually, these tokens are converted into, these tokens are converted into nodes. These tokens are converted into nodes. These nodes, generally you call them as elements. Elements. That means that B is converted as which element? Bold. Nodes. These nodes are arranged. These nodes are arranged in a hierarchical order. That means these nodes are arranged in a hierarchical order. Hierarchical order means parent and child. They are arranged in a hierarchical order. That means you will have like parent and child hierarchy. These nodes are arranged in a parent-child hierarchy. This hierarchical order of parent and child is called DOM. The nodes are arranged in a hierarchical order called DOM. This DOM is formed into, actually this DOM is converted into, this DOM is converted into a layout. It is converted into a layout. Layout indicates where which component should come. This layout will undergo a process. It will undergo a process called rendering. It will undergo a process called rendering. And rendering is generating output is called rendering. After rendering is finished, now this output must be displayed in the browser. The process of displaying output in the browser is called painting. We call paint. And the result of painting is you will see on the screen in bold hello. That is the process how browser works actually. This everybody learns in the beginning of HTML because they should know how their HTML works first. That means if you learned HTML, you should know how your HTML is translated by browser. This is browser engine. That means you write characters, you write markup. Markup is converted into bytes. Bytes are converted into characters. Characters are converted into tokens. Tokens are converted into nodes. Nodes are arranged in a hierarchy called DOM. DOM is formed into a layout. Layout will undergo a process called render, and it will finally paint the output. This happens everywhere. Generally, this is the browser architecture. That is the browser architecture actually. This is how actually the process works. This is the browser architecture. Browser have browser engines, rendering engines, so many. And this is the basic flow, how it actually works in different engines like WebKit, Gecko. This is the process actually. You return the characters markup. Markup converts into bytes, bytes to characters, characters to tokens, and tokens to nodes, nodes to DOM. And after that, what happens? The DOM is actually, the DOM is converted into layout. The layout rendered and final result is what? Paint. This process happens in the internal of every browser. This is the basic flow of your HTML actually. For example, see here. Suppose I'm showing you some page. Suppose some page. In this page, you see I'm writing bold and I am writing hello. Am I writing any doc type HTML, HTML, head section, body section? Am I writing any sections? I'm not writing any sections. Let's run this. I'm not writing any sections, but browser knows where to keep it. Browser knows where to keep it. You can see here, I will open, right click, go to inspect. When I go to inspect, you can see in the inspect, there is elements. and you can observe in the elements category, it is in body section. Have I designed any HTML head body sections? So browser, you write anyway, browser arranges in an order. It have an hierarchical order. That hierarchical order is DOM. You can see actually, let's go to performance. In the performance, what I will do here, I will start recording. I am starting recording. I click on record. It starts recording. It starts recording the activity actually. Now I will refresh the page. Okay. Let's wait for 10-15 seconds of recording. Then we will stop profiling. Wait for 10-15 seconds. After that, stop. It will show what happened in the background. So you can see this in profile. What happened in the background, you can see. You can see what happened in the background. It is showing some activity in the background. It is showing some activity in the background. That means the network, the activities in the background, it is showing all the activity in the background. I will do one more here, see. So in the performance, start recording, refresh, wait for 10-15 seconds. So after profiling for 10-15 seconds, then click on stop. So then it will stop and it will load the profiles. And in the profiles, usually it will show what are the activities happened in the background. You can see the activities happened in the background. You see, there is rendering, there is painting, there is scripting, there is loading process. So rendering is generating output and painting is finally presenting the output. So these are all technical things. At your level, knowing all these is too much, not required. But experience level, people have to know in the background what is happening, because if a page is not working properly, we have to know where it is slow. Why it is slow? Is rendering slow? Is painting slow? Is tokenization slow? Where it is slow? Yesterday I told you a flow. Your order is delivered slow. Where it is slow? That means your page is slow. Somebody complained that your website is loading slow. Then how, as a developer, you will identify where slow? Slow means simply slow. Where it is slow? There are various phases of a web page. These are all phases of web page. In this phase where it is slow, that is what developer need to identify. And he need to resolve the problem. You are freshers. You will just be involved in developing application. But experienced people, they are involved in maintaining application. They face more problems. That means you don't have all these problems. You will develop and give. But your experienced people, your seniors, they have to take care about performance. You just write about logic. They have to check, is this logic good? Is it fast or slow? Which one is best? If any problem comes, it cannot work properly. So these are all the phases. These are all the phases. And see, what is the phase painting called? Painting means presenting the final output, right? So before painting, what happens? Before painting, rendering will happen. Before rendering, what happens? Layout. Before layout, what happens? DOM. DOM is node. Node is nothing but elements. You see here in the browser, elements category is there. These are elements. You will never see the word tag, right? So HTML is not collection of tags. HTML is collection of elements. HTML is not collection of tags. That school level definition that is. In schools for kids, we tell that HTML is collection of tags. You forget that at that level, school level only. HTML is not collection of tags. HTML is collection of elements. There is no concept of tag. That is a general word. Technically, there are elements. Elements are presented in a hierarchy called DOM. Now, why you need to know this? Because to explain the flow now. What happens in after content init? After content init, that means content is initialization finished. Now what happens is here you see the phases. Content init and after content checked. After content init and content checked. What is meant by content init and content checked? What is meant by view init and view checked? These are two options. Generally, what happens is content init, content checked difference is nothing but here. Content init means, so already memory is initialized. Na? So whatever memory is initialized. So what content init will do is it initializes the memory. It initializes the memory for creating layout. It initializes the memory for creating layout. If I don't explain the previous flow, you never know what is a layout. Understood? That means people who don't know how their HTML works, they can't understand the word layout. If I tell this sentence before I explain that part, then you don't know what is layout. So because every web developer knows that layout is after DOM. That means it initializes memory for creating the layout. After that, after creating that layout, what happens is it configures the memory for rendering the layout. Already I told you two things now. This layout, how it is presented. To present the layout, which process have to happen? Rendering. Rendering means it is generating the final output, but output is not presented. It is generating the final output, but output is not presented. That means the output is ready. The output is ready. What is the result to be presented is ready, but presentation is not finished. It is not done. That means we have content init. So in this, what happens is actually in content init. In the content init, what happens? Implicit templates are used. Implicit templates are used. Implicit templates are used in ng after content init. Implicit templates are used in this. Implicit templates are defined. What do you mean by implicit templates? Implicit templates are nothing but you are rendering in you are using ng if, you are using ng for, right? You are using like ng switch. You are using all these, right? These are all what they are doing. Ng if, ng for, ng switch, what they are doing? They are adding layout. Na? That means adding element into DOM, removing element from the DOM. That means these are all responsible for creating a layout. Layout tells where which content to come. That is managed by these templates. That means a div should display or remove. A paragraph should display or remove. A div should repeat. how many times it should repeat, where it should repeat. All this is managed in ng after content init. That means the layout is created, then output is generated in which phase? ng after content init. Now tell me here in this phase, actually is every template is every template internally generated? Is every template internally generated? Every template is not internally generated. You learned that a template can be externally generated and it can be added to the page. What is that process called as? A template can be externally generated and it can be added to the page. What is that process called as? We learned that process. So that process is called as content projection. Am I right? Remember that? That means the next phase is so ng after content init. ng after content init. So and after that ng after content checked. So what you understood here, do check. If any event is not internally performed, explicitly it is performed by do check. If any template is not internally rendered, it is explicitly rendered by whom? Content checked. Content checked. That means after content checked, what happens is in this phase, the explicit templates are created. Explicit templates are created. The explicit templates are added to page dynamically. All this happens in ng after content init. That means it handles which phase? Content projection. It handles content projection. It is managed by what are the members who manage content projection? What are the members that manage content projection? Content projection is managed by, we learned two things now. Content projection is managed by template reference. Am I right? Template reference. Another one, it is managed by view child. This is handled by content check. These are the activities performed in this fifth phase. That means some templates are internally generated. Some templates are internally added. That is done by whom? That is done by the previous phase. So some templates are explicitly created and they are explicitly added. That is managed by this. That is managed by ng after content checked. ng after content checked. So these are important. So implicit events happens in ng on changes. Explicit events happens in ng do check. Implicit template rendering happens in ng after init. So after ng after content init. Explicit templates are generated and added to page in which phase? ng after content checked. Okay. Output is ready. Output is ready, but it is not on screen yet. The layout is ready. After the layout ready, this must be painted in the UI. It must be painted in the page na. The painting process that is managed by, the painting process is managed by this one, view init. It is managed by view init. So ng after view init. Actually, ng after view init, it is It is responsible for handling painting, initial painting. It is responsible for initial painting. I told you in the flow what is painting. Painting means finally presenting the output, but it is initial painting. Initial painting means, so it is the output. This is the output. This is the output before change. That means before change, what is the output? It will be there. That means, for example, you are using drop down. In the drop down, you will select I want details. Then the details component will be rendered. That means details screen will be rendered. You selected preview screen will be rendered. That means before you selected anything, by default some screen is rendered now, right? Before any change happened, by default some screen is presented. That initial screen is defined by using which one? ng after view init. ng after view init. That means you can say the default UI is presented on browser. So it is presented on browser. The default UI is presented on browser. But final output is not ready. Final output means what? Whenever you make some change, the final output is generated. And that is in which phase? So that is in the phase, which phase? It is ng after view checked. ng after view checked, that is the phase. So we have another phase, that is ng after view checked. That means it is responsible for generating final output. It is responsible for generating final output. That means the changes in UI are updated. So in this phase, that means the final output is ready. The final output is ready. That is all happens in ng after view check. So before the changes, the initial output will be there. After the changes, the final output will be there. That means before you click any button, before you select any option, some default output will be there. Once you click the button, once you select any option, the output changes, the result comes. That is the final output. That final output is rendered and it is displayed in which phase? ng after view checked. View is related to UI. View means UI. Already we discussed MVC, right? View refers to UI, right? And finally, now it is done. So this component is finished. Now what happens? The last phase is ng on destroy. ng on destroy. What happens in ng on destroy? So generally when this will be called, that means it is called when you change from one component to another. That means later you will learn how to change from one component to another. We will learn navigation. That means we will discuss how to handle navigation. That means user will change from one component to another. So for that we have to learn another concept called routing. By using that concept, we can handle changes. That means we can handle navigation. When you are change from one component to another, that means the current component is completed. and the next component is loading. Now what happens is the memory allocated for current component is destroyed. Not only the memory allocated for current component is destroyed, actually what happens is it will unregister, unsubscribe. It will unsubscribe all the methods. It will unsubscribe all the methods. It disconnects all actions, and cleans up the memory for component. So cleans up the memory allocated for component. That is what destroying. These all activities will happen. Destroying is nothing but it will unsubscribe the methods. If you remembered, I told you subscribe. In which concept I told you? Event binding. Na? In event binding, I told you that there will be a sender and a subscriber. How events work? Events work by using a sender and subscriber mechanism. Actually, we have a method. So we have a method insert click. Am I right? This insert click will fire up on button click. On button click, what happens? Insert click. This will fire up. What I told you that this method is subscribed to this button. The method is subscribed to this button. Whenever button click happens, the subscribed will be notified. The subscribed will be notified and it will perform the action. It is performed the action. That is how event works actually. Same, suppose you subscribe to a YouTube channel. When you subscribe to a YouTube channel, anybody uploads a new video, then immediately a notification comes to you. So to your email or your YouTube, a notification comes. So that notification tells that there is some video uploaded and you can start watching it. That means a subscriber gets notification and that notification tells that some change happened. So the point is the methods are subscribed to events. Now on destroy, what happens? These methods are disconnected. Unsubscribed. Unsubscribed means there is a connection between these two. Now when a component is moving to another component, these will disconnect. Any connection, subscriptions, everything disconnects. After disconnecting, it will clean up the memory and it will unload the component. This all happens in which phase? Destroy. So this is generally how it works in all the phases. These are all the phases of component life cycle. So what happens on first phase? ng on changes. Before ng on changes, what will happen? Before ng on changes, what will happen? The component object is created. Before the life cycle starts, first component object is created. Who creates the component object? Constructor. After creating the component object, the memory is initialized. The values are initialized into memory. Values are binded to UI, identifying the changes, updating back. All these activities are done by ng on changes. After that, the memory is allocated for the component. That memory will be shared to the child components. That happens in which phase? ng on init. ng on init actually. Init. ng on init means memory is initialized. That memory will be allowing to transport data from parent to child. But child to parent data cannot be transported. That means if any action cannot be internally performed, we have to explicitly perform. Explicitly, we have to send data from parent to child to parent. That is done by ng do check. The custom events, event emitter, and output activities, this all happens in do check. Do check. And after that, what happens in content init? So initialization of memory, for which purpose creating a layout. A layout is created. A layout decides where which content to display. The default layout is created. Now, if any layout need to be explicitly added, that is done by using ng after content check. So content projection happens in which phase? ng after content checked. Content projection means creating template explicitly, adding the templates to the page. That is what content. After that, final output need to be presented. That is done by view init. View init. Initial output is rendered and the final output is rendered on that means output rendering means painting processor. The painting is done in view init and view check. After that, disconnect with the methods, destroy the memory allocated for component. All that happens on ng on destroy. These are all life cycle hooks. Remember, these hooks you don't need to write. They internally work. That means every component internally uses them. You learned these phases. Generally, we can write these phases. Why to write these phases if already they are working? Already these all phases are working. Internally, they are working. Then why do you write these phases again? We can write. Why to write? Same like every class have a default constructor. Na? Then why you are writing another constructor? Already class is having a constructor. Then why you are writing a constructor explicitly? Because at the time of construction of object, we want some additional functionality to perform. Then we will give that to constructor. Even you don't write a constructor, there will be a constructor. Then why you are writing a constructor? Because I want some extra work to be performed on that phase. What is the phase while creating an object? Same. Suppose a component is destroying. While component is destroying, some memory it is removing, but some another explicit memory it is not removing. Then I want it to remove that memory also. Then what we can do, we can write. For example, you see here. So means I will tell you the point. Suppose we have a component. For component, some memory is allocated. In this memory, some A, so some B, like this, some values are there. But generally, this component can store some data outside the component. We can store data. Actually, outside the component, we can store data by using some external memory concepts. Like we have state, we have like cookies. These are going to store the data. These are going to store the data not in component memory. They use a separate memory. Now what happens is when component is closed, this memory is destroyed. But is this memory destroyed? That is still present. But actually this component is using that memory. But that is not related to component memory. That is the reason it is not destroyed. For example, you logged in into Google, Gmail. You logged in into your Gmail account. You closed the browser. Will you sign out? Why? I closed browser. I closed the browser. Will you sign out by closing the browser? Why you will not sign out? Because your sign-in details are not stored in browser memory. They are stored in some your hard disk memory. Due to that, what happens next time when you open browser, enter Gmail without any login, directly it logs in. Understood? That means your Gmail component is closed, but you are still signed in Gmail. How? That means it is not using component memory. It is using some external memory. External memory. Will a bank application also will do same? Will a bank application also will do same? You closed the bank application, so it will sign out automatically. Na? That means the memory allocated outside its component also, it is destroying it. That means ng on destroy is automatically destroying components memory. But some memory maybe it may be using outside its context. Then how to delete it? That means now you have to manually write on destroying, delete that external memory also. Otherwise it will not. That is the reason we need these events. That means already we have these events. Then why you need those events extra? Generally we write like this. So how you define? So we have to write like ng on destroy. Ng on destroy, first we have to implement that. Component can implement. Component is currently implementing on changes. Can you implement multiple? Multiple inheritance supported? It is supported for interfaces. These are all interfaces. That's the reason it is supported. That means we have to use on what? Destroy. On destroy, and we have to write an event. What is it? ng destroy. ng on destroy. Here we write all the logic to destroy the explicit memory. For that, later I will tell you how to delete cookies and all. For that, we have to first install cookies. After installing cookies, we can delete the cookies and manage them. That means here what we do, here we write logic to destroy explicit memory. Whatever memory explicitly defined, that will be destroyed. If you don't do that, it will remove only the current component memory. The explicit memory is still in use. So this is why you need those events. That means already the events are present. They are working internally. Then why you need explicit events to handle this situation? I will show you one example of change detection. That means you learned about content projection. That means you say content projection. Content projection. Content projection is nothing but creating the templates and rendering the templates. There is another option called change detection. Change detection is identifying whether the change occurred or not. Identifying the changes and updating the changes. I will show you one small example to understand whether the parent child same concept working properly or not. Let's see. Means how the change detection works, I will show you. Means internally how it is going to work. Let's do one thing. This is, I will clean up all this. We have a parent component and we will have a child component. Parent component HTML, I will delete all of this. I will just keep it as parent. Parent component. This is a parent component. And we have child component. I will clean up this child component. and HTML. Here also we will keep a heading. Another heading I will give as child component. Now what we are doing here is, so we will keep the parent component in the startup. Parent component is in the startup. Okay. Now let's access here. The parent component is working. App parent also we have to change in index. So this is app what parent. So we have parent component. So this is the parent working. Yeah. Now what happens is here in the parent component, I am keeping a text box. Let's go to the parent component and here we will put a text box. So data term. So here I said user name. Data definition input type is equal to text. Okay, now here that is a text box is here. Now whatever username is entered, I want to display in child component. That means below here we will access a app, which one? Child. In the child component, I want to display that message. So we need to transport data from parent to child. Whatever username entered, it should be sent to child component. That means first in the child component, there must be a input property. So it input property public, what is it? Username. It is what type? String, and it is initially empty. Now into that username should be displayed here. Here we will put a paragraph and we will say hello and that username. So we will put that username. Whatever username is there, it should display. Now the parent component have to send data of this into child. Now how do we do that? Here we are using ng model hash what? Username is equal to ng model. Now app child is expecting a property called, so property called what? Username. This is username property. And we will pass our username dot value. Whatever username you entered inside this, its value will be passed here. That means now what happens when we are typing the data from parent, it will go to child. We are transporting the data from parent component to child. Now observe carefully here. This is initially, this is child component. Child component is defined as string or it is defined as null. It is configured as null and by default it is null. That means there is no value. It is initialized to null. That means there is nothing configured inside it. Now observe here, we need to send the data into that at display. Now what is the data? I am binding directly here. I am directly binding here, ng model. I will do one thing here. I will create a property public, username property string, and it is what? Null, and default it is what? Null. Now this I will bind here. Then we will use MVC approach. In ng model, we have to define, what is that? We have to define username, and that just username should be sent here, right? Now this is actually same concept. This is also same. Here it is same concept. Now I am using MVC approach. MVC approach, the value for username is coming from this property. Am I right? It is coming from this property. Now see, I will go to child component. In the child component, I want to know change detections. Then see, I'm implementing here, implement, so on changes. And here I will define, so a method that is ng on change. Ng on changes. Where is this? Yeah. Ng on changes. So implementing na. Ng on changes. So ng on changes. We are implementing that ng on changes here. This ng on changes, what happens is this ng on changes will use a changes. It is of type, what type? Simple changes. It is of type simple changes. So simple, yeah, it is of type simple changes. Now you can see it is not resolved. Type simple changes is unresolved because it is not defined here. On changes is defined. That means we are implementing. Here we have simple change. Simple changes is an reference. It is of type simple changes. So default it will come. Otherwise we need to write like this. Now see what we are doing here. We are keeping some details like public. One is current value. Current value is a string and it is null. By default it is null. I will use another one, previous value. Previous value is also string and it is what? Null, and default it is null. Now I am writing here a simple for, we need to access where change. So here we have change of, what is it? Changes. We need to access change of changes. That means it is a actually it is a property. That means it's an object. Na? Object means we cannot use of, we have to use which operator? In. We are reading every property in that. So let change is equal to changes of property. We will send the property. Then this change can access the properties of changes. That means actually they have an option. This dot current value is equal to change dot, we have current value. This dot previous value is equal to change dot, we have previous value. Yesterday I showed you that simple changes have two properties, previous value and current value. I told you an algorithm. If previous value is equal to current value, that means no change. Those values we are collecting and storing here. That means we are accessing the previous value, current value, and display. Now here we are writing a simple logic here. We will put a message also. We will put a message MSG what string type and it is null. By default it is a null. Now in that message I will write a condition. If this dot current value is equal to this dot what? Previous value. Then MSG, this dot MSG is equal to no change detected. No change detected. This should come. Otherwise, this dot MSG, it should display change detected. This is the message. Just I am writing a program internally to show the status of changes. And I will print that here. That message I will print here. I will put a heading. and I will put here what MSG, the message. And you can see that the message we are trying to display there in the child component, no change detected. There is no change detected. And I clicked here, I am typing, now change detected. That means it is identifying the changes. That means it verifies, is the previous value, current value same? Now let's do one more work here. Initially, there is no change detected. Okay, let's observe carefully. I will go to parent component. In the parent component, you initialize a null. I will initialize some John. I will initialize some value John. I just initialized, and you see here, I initialized change detected. I am not doing any change. Then why it is showing change detected? See, I am not making any change here. Without making change, why it is saying change detected? Because initializing a value is also under which concept? Change detection. Initializing value is also under change detection. You initialized some value means it is change detected. Means before initialization, what it is having? Undefined. Undefined is now assigned to value. That is just to show you the basic concept behind it. That means how NG model actually works. That means NG model works with this mechanism. It will verify whether the value changed or not. That's the reason many people ask this doubt like, sir, without writing event on change and all, generally in JavaScript, we have to write on key up on change. Without writing any event, how it is changing the value and updating? That means in the background, there is a concept working called change detection. That change detection is verifying the changes in the value and updating. And initialization comes under change detection. That is the reason I am typing something here. So it still says change detection. But actually, so if I don't initialize any value, I keep it as what? Null. If I keep it null means there is no value initialized. If there is no value initialized, that means there is no change detected. There is no change detected. Now, once you start typing, the change is detected. But without typing also, change is detected. How? If you set some value into it. For example, see now, let's put some more logic here. What we will do is in the child component, suppose you are writing the previous value, current value also. That means we are verifying that value here. So in HTML, I am defining here some presentation. So I want to display the previous value and current value. Let's put a logic here. So if here we will put directly those values, we will put right here. I will show you previous value. Previous value. How to get the previous value? So we have previous value. There is a property called previous value. In the next line, I will get the current value. Current value. How will get the current value? Will put the current value. And for previous value, I will write a logic here. If previous value is equal to what? Undefined. Undefined. If it is undefined, then it should print the word undefined. It should print undefined. Otherwise, it should print that value. Okay. That means it should print previous value. So that means we have to define like this. Now see here in the output, it says previous value is undefined. Previous value is undefined, current value is empty. Now when I start typing into it, D, that means change detection. That means previous value is what? Undefined. Now it is current value is D. Is previous value equal to current value? No, that's why change detected. Now I entered A. You see previous value is D and current value is DA. That means change detection. So previous value is DA and current value is DAV. That means they are not matching. Previous value is not matching with current value means change detection. If it is matching, so change not detected. So this is a simple example to understand the concept, and observe carefully now. I'm not typing. What I will do is I will initialize some value into this. So instead of null, I initialize John. And you see, it says that, so when I initialize that John, it says previously it is undefined and current value is John. In that case, it is change detected. That means even you are not typing anything, even you are not clicking anything, change detection will be working. Don't think that change detection means only when you make any change, because even initialization also comes under the category of change detection. This is just an example to understand the architecture behind, because at very experienced level interviews, they ask change detection, content projection. They will ask what is simple changes, how to identify the changes. They will ask how NG model works in the background. What is the architecture behind this NG model? How it will update the changes. So these all comes under this category. So for some people, entire Angular interview for 1.5 to 2 hours in companies happens in life cycle only. That means it is so huge concept that so many questions can be asked in this, that so entire Angular interview can be on this life cycle concept. But don't worry, that is for experienced people. For freshers, all topics they will touch, they will ask here and there some important, but these are topics which are mandatory that you will get as concepts in interviews when you are attending, right? So you must be very perfect in understanding the events. I hope you understood all the events, right? Life cycle events, how to handle them. Now, this is all you need to know about the concept of working with components. Now, once you know about components, next we will discuss about how we can use so material components. Till now, what you have learned is your own components, but Angular provides ready-made components which you can use in your projects. That I will explain 1-2 components. Others you have to learn by yourself. Why? Because these all components are in hundreds in number. Depending on project and requirements, we use them. If you learn 1 or 2 components, others you can try by yourself, right? That I will show you how to use. This is called as actually Angular material components. Angular material components that we'll see in tomorrow's session, right? Tomorrow we'll discuss about this, right?